Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith in the New York City metropolitan area. Please download the app, share it with your friends and family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And if you like what we do, we go live on social media Thursday nights, 9 o'clock, where we get in a lot of trouble, but that's fine by us. And so if you like what we're doing, you like our content, please help us to get out to a wider audience. And of course, we post all of our Veritas interviews on social media also. So hit a like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Help us out a little bit. So today we're going to be discussing a couple topics, two books in particular. And we have on Allison Ellis. And Allison is with Mount Titano Media. Allison is the founder of that company. She has built and sold businesses in the financial and publishing industries in the U.S. and Europe for 2 decades. She has put her career on hold to homeschool. Yay. All right. So we're very happy about that. And the two books we're going to be discussing are Finding Our Words, Words That Made America. I think that's kind of important to talk about. And Heroines of History. So Allison Ellis, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Thank you, Joe and Joe. It's great to be here.
No, it's great to have you. Like I said, this is gonna be a lively conversation. I could tell right away. Joe Resinello, where do you want to start?
Allison, we always begin with a prayer to Our Lady. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Good place to start. Education. Obviously, Joe mentioned that you're homeschooling, so it's something very personal for you. Joe and I both are fathers, so it's personal for us as well. We've addressed this topic a number of times on the show. Public education in America, even in very affluent communities, is a wreck. It's a wreck and it's a shame. So I guess a good place to start is, how has American public education changed and led to many of the problems that we're seeing today, because they're vast?
We could talk about that for days on end. So let's just summarize it this way. We could go back to the Industrial Revolution and the need to create the factory worker, not the scholar, not necessarily the warrior, but the worker bees. But then you accelerate to World War I, Great Depression, World War II. That was the next big wave of hit on education. And you had the GI Bill, you had people flooding into universities that hadn't necessarily been prepared for the level that was being taught at that time. So that's another time that it was watered down, dumbed down. And then the 60s and 70s, they were trying all kinds of experiments in education. One of them that was one of the biggest blights on reading was holistic reading. Have you heard of that? Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, a lot of people don't know. And this is one of the things that has actually imprisoned minds. Holistic reading is the concept that we don't need to teach phonics. We'll teach words by sight. So when you see a squiggle like this and a squiggle like this, it's S-E-E, that means see. So they were literally teaching the English language as if it were hieroglyphs or Mandarin characters. So children had no ability beyond the little glyphs they were taught, these words, look, see, run. They couldn't go to the next step, even putting words together from roots, running, ran. It's unbelievable what happened. And so when children graduate now from college and they're absolutely illiterate, they're probably, one of the possibilities is they were a victim of one of the schools that adopted this holistic reading approach. And holistic, of course, sounds good, but it was a nightmare. So in general, just because of everything that's transpired, and I discovered this over 2 decades of research. I actually was working, my career was to be able to leave and homeschool. I knew ahead of time, way early in my life, that I was not going to have my children really early, because I came from a background, a latchkey kid, working from age 13, and I knew I wasn't going to do that for my family. So I worked to be able to leave and homeschool, which was the best decision I ever made. But originally it was just because I wanted to have that intimacy and that bonding and the time that children need for their formation when they're young. But when I started looking around to figure out how I would homeschool, I was interviewing schools. I was talking to my previous schools, back to my high school days, asking what materials they used and what they use now. And I could not believe what I saw. I mean, first, they hardly use books, little pamphlets, Xerox papers, and devices. Occasionally, you'll have a school that will, give a nod to a classic and read a portion of one great book. But just to sum it up in one sentence, the entire devastation, we've lost our words. We do not read the greatest written and spoken words of all time anymore. And when you lose those words and that history, you lose everything they represent. So in our case, if we're not studying US history, I mean, to me, at this point, I didn't know any US history before I started homeschooling my daughter. That was one of the big lights that went on. How, after 12 years of Catholic school, undergrad in Texas, studying in a master's program at Stanford, how did I not know anything? Not more than a handful or 10 presidents, none of the wars, no details about the Declaration of Independence or Constitution. How is that even possible? We don't study those words anymore. So you can see where this is going and how that inspired Mount Titano's first release, Finding Our Words, Words That Made America.
Finding Our Words, Words That Made America. Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Allison, at the expense of sounding conspiratorial, okay, which I have no problem doing. How much of what you just described is intentional? You see, because Joe and I are of the view that in history, those who seek the good, the true, and the beautiful, yes, us Roman Catholics and people of goodwill, have enemies. And we have enemies of our souls and enemies of our lives. And one of the ways that the enemy thrives is to or targets is education, keeping you stupid, quite frankly.
Right.
Perhaps not even teaching transcendentals like the good, the true, and the beautiful,
Yep.
and dumbing everything down. In your view, you don't have to agree, and if you disagree, please tell me how much of this degradation of our public education system was intentional.
I always try to see the bright side and believe in people, and to a great extent I do. However, I've seen too much of the world to think that what you just said is not true. So one of the things I did when I finally had the means and was working is I started traveling the world far and wide, and I went to 50 countries. 10 of them were communist, some during Soviet Union and some post-Soviet Union, war-torn, natural disasters, jungles, hellholes. And in every one of those places, I found things to love and people to love and learned. However, I also, that was of course, how could it not open your eyes to see that much of what's on offer in the world? Having seen that, I learned first, there is no nation like the United States. There's nothing that's more worthy of being protected, and there's nothing that's given more in general to the world. Sure, we've exported some things that are, let's say, undesirable, but the scales are greatly in our favor of the things that we've exported that are good and true and beautiful. And I only say that because I've seen so much of what's on offer. And communism, I mean, that's not a surprise, it's not a secret. That is their plan to run through the institutions. So that's one culprit we can look at. And, it's interesting. Bukele, leader of
Salvador.
Exactly. He said that there's so clearly that the mass destruction that has occurred in the United States, both city takeovers, crime, education being in shambles, he said there's no way that an outside enemy could have done so much damage internally so fast. They're either, sure, it could have started externally, but they've succeeded in, it's coming from within now. And so some of it is knowing. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think also education has been so bad now. I'd say any of us educated after the 40s, it's been so significantly compromised from what it had been, could be, and should be, that a lot of people are innocently ignorant, innocently foolish. They don't know the history of the Soviet Union. I spent time at Stanford listening to people rave about the works of Karl Marx, and I thought, these unknowing, innocent, blithering idiots.
Right. And I'm glad we're talking about this because this is something Joe and I hammer on all the time. You mentioned the institutions. So, Antonio Gramsci's name comes up a lot at the front line with Joe and Joe because they've told us what their intention is, whether it's education, whether it's the church, whether it's the media, whether it's the government. These are the institutions that protect the individual from the power of the state. And communists can't have that. That's part of their reason for being is they have to wreck your education, and they're gonna tell you what history is. They're gonna I hesitate to use even the word teach. They're going to indoctrinate you into the ways of Karl Marx and all that. This is not conspiracy. See, because I could hear people say, "Oh, there you go, you conspiracy theorists again." They told us what they were doing, and now we're seeing the result.
It's the famous adage, when people tell you who they are, believe them the first time.
Yeah, it would make a lot. It would make a lot of sense. Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. She's the founder of Mount Titano Media, and we're discussing two books. The first one is Finding Our Words, Words That Made America, and the second we'll talk about in the next segment is Heroines of History. Allison, real quick before I hand it over to Joe, where could our folks buy buy your books and learn more about Mount Titano Media?
They can go to our website, mounttitanomedia.com. Titano is Titano, like Titan with an O. So Mount Titano Media, and everything's on Amazon.
All right, cool. Joe Rossinello.
Allison, you went to Stanford, excuse me, and clearly, I mean, that's a very elite school. And I think a lot of parents, basically, that's like their dream to send their kid to a lot of these schools. Joe and I were educated through the Catholic system. And you see kids go to these schools and then they come home, their parents sacrifice to no end, spend $400,000 to get an Ivy League education or an education from Stanford. And basically they come home, you don't even recognize your kid. And then they lead a life of emptiness. They chase after nonsense, and ultimately and sadly, they destroy themselves. And this is not being hyperbolic. This is happening in real time. We watch it in the news. These are smart, quote unquote, people. Like, analytically speaking, they may not have gotten a proper great books education, but analytically speaking, these are very intelligent people. Yet they've embraced things that they think they're going to get meaning out of their life. They're chasing after things that ultimately are undermining the United States of America and are ultimately undermining themselves, which is insane because they're not, as George Carlin, the great George Carlin would say, you're not part of that club. People actually have this delusion that they're part of a club, as in the oligarchs that run everything. I could hear it now. Joe, you're going on a rant and you're completely conspiratorial and you're crazy. But I don't think I am. Because we're watching America deteriorate, and the best and the brightest of our country, whom you probably sat next to, and I had friends that went to the Ivy League as well, and they went to school with movers and shakers, run hedge funds, heart surgeons. I'm talking like people that are at the peaks of American society. Yet they've embraced the very things that are destroying this country. Talk to that, because sadly, many people, this is broadcast in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and their kids are going to those schools. And they actually think that they're going to come out and be healthy. Some will, most won't.
That is 100% correct. And Stanford, that was my dream too. You said it's the dream for parents. It was my own dream. I wanted to go fresh out of high school, but that was in no way within the financial means, or I don't even know if I could have gotten in at the time. I don't know. But it was the ultimate, that was the pinnacle, Stanford. I still feel that love for it, despite some of the things that transpired there. Now, there were wonderful professors, mostly the old guard, who are almost, they're at the point where they're, dying, very old. And the younger ones, there were a lot of sincere people, but again, they had already, you know, communism. There's no other way to describe it. And I listened to a very diverse group of people. You know, that's a big word, and it was a very diverse group, all at Stanford, and so many of them whining about how they were underprivileged, victims of this and that. You know, I was sitting in the class with that, and I think, my God, you do not know what racism or poverty or underprivileged means. Take a trip somewhere outside the United States and not stay in an American hotel. Go and see what's on offer. It was just shocking. So a part of that is just naivete. They see everything around them and they live their lives on screens now. And we're going on almost a few decades now of people living on screens. Mm-hmm. So it all goes back, I think, at this point, you know, we can talk about what happened, but going forward, how do we fix this? I really think most of the teachers in schools now were educated after the 40s. So their education was compromised and even many of them poisoned. So they don't know any different. So it's not going to change, just hoping that it will and continuing to send our children to these schools and these universities. It has to. Yes, Joe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So the first segment, we're discussing finding our words, words that made America. We want to save Allison a few minutes because we want you to talk about the book and some of the, words that we're talking about. But you did make me think of something. You said, well, how do we go forward? Joe and I are of the opinion, okay, we're with C.S. Lewis, which is, and I'm paraphrasing, when you are on the wrong path, there is only one option. You must stop, turn around, and go back to the place you started. You don't look for off ramps. You don't look to say, well, it might be better down the road. You must, you're on the wrong path. You're like Dante. You're in the woods. Okay. You've just gotten to the dark place. You got to turn around and you got to go back to where you started. If outside of that, I'm not interested in other people's opinion about how we're supposed to reform education. You're homeschooling. That'd be a great place to start. Fighting back against those who would beat you up in the public arena, okay, for homeschooling or proposing homeschooling children or homeschooling associations and wresting power away from those who corrupted the system in the first place. I think you know where I'm going. I'd love your comments.
Exactly. This goes back to Reagan's words. Greatest change in America starts over the dinner table. It starts at home. We cannot any longer, and we've all been a victim and participants in this, we cannot outsource parenthood. And to the greatest degree almost imaginable, that is what has happened. And when it's financially impossible, we can't blame those people. But when it is possible, and in my early days of homeschooling, it was a financial struggle. I was wearing my husband's boxers and t-shirts in my pregnancy instead of buying maternity clothes. It was not an affluent time for us. So, but there was nothing that was going to make me not homeschool. It was out of the question. And again, it was the greatest decision ever. And for those who can't, I like to say that we all homeschool, some just more than others. So if people are in a situation where they need to send their children to school or they feel strongly that they want to for some reason, that's their choice. But that doesn't mean abdicate. It doesn't mean you're outsourcing your child's development and formation. That has to happen at home. And so all of the books we publish, that's the intention, is that these are books that parents will love reading, teachers will love reading, and children will love reading. And many books used in school, no parent wants to read. The children don't want to read them. They're awful. They're dull. They're fleeting material and written poorly, and mostly cartoons. Who cares?
That's what I say. Who cares? Mount Titano Media, please go. Is there a website for Mount Titano Media?
MountTitanomedia.com.
There you go. Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So in the first segment, we're discussing finding our words, words that made America. Joe Resinello.
Allison, who are some of the folks that you put together in this book and some of the things they had to say?
This is the book. It's 17 speeches from Patrick Henry, 1775, to Ronald Reagan, 1981. And a lot of fantastic, wonderful, educated people in between. That's the common denominator with all of them. They come from all walks of life, but they're all outstandingly educated. Some of them classically educated, but some self-educated. I'd say actually all of them self-educated to some degree or others, but a few almost entirely. So that would be Frederick Douglass, Lincoln, and Booker T. Washington. Two of those pulled themselves right out up from chains and illiteracy to be learned, wise orators and people who were very influential. And they didn't do what so many people want to do today, which is lie back, complain, and hope that teachers, unions, or the government finds a way to fix this. We hope they do. We can work for that change. That's good to do. But we're not waiting for it and sacrificing the next 2, 3, 5 generations and our nation in the meantime. So, like those self-educated leaders, we take the reins, and we do that by picking up the Bible, picking up a catechism, picking up the great words of history and reading them. And ideally, reading them together aloud with our family. That's the way to turn this around. It's that simple. So as bad as the situation is, the solution is equally easy. It takes time, but no matter how much time we can allocate, if it's only 15 minutes a day, if that's genuinely all we've got to give to our children with undivided attention, devices away, put them away and read something good and beautiful every day. That's the restoration of school and education. It's the fostering of leadership for our future, but at the very core, it's the restoration of the family.
But again, if we're talking about those things which are targeted by our enemies, well, the family, well, that's a big one, you know. And again, it's not conspiracy, because those who are, you know, those who have ears to hear, all right, and eyes to see, this has been said. They openly, we mentioned Gramsci. He said that this is the way you have to go. I'll throw this out there to you. Because yes, politics are important. Okay. And people say, well, you could talk about because politics are important. That's why how we organize things, how we function within our individual states are very important. I'm in Arizona. I got out of Dodge. Joe's still in New Jersey. I got out of Dodge about 3.5 years ago. Okay. I know that in Arizona, they do not back down or kowtow to the teachers unions that want to do what you are describing when it comes to indoctrination and things like that. The public school system here stinks just like it does in New Jersey. However, here they do have, and funded by the same way the public schools are, charter schools. And those charter schools, particularly one called, well, and let me not say it because my wife works there. I'll just say a good charter school that models itself on classic liberal with used the right way, classic
Right.
liberal education. When you walk into the lobby of a school and the first thing you see is a huge painting of the School of Athens, I think you're probably in the right place for your kid. All right, if you're going to send your child to a what is essentially a public school, but that's because the people of Arizona demand that, because they don't say don't give like they do in New Jersey. Don't give money to those evil charter schools. Give money. We just need more money in the public education system, which we know is a lie. What are your thoughts on that? Because my son, who goes to one of those charter schools, is getting a fantastic high school education.
Yes, that's another part of the good news is there's a great restoration underway, and being Americans with our wild, self-sufficient spirit, they're starting schools. Memoria Press is one of the greatest examples. I mean, they started in Cheryl Lowe's, family kitchen table, and it's become this huge organization with cottage schools everywhere, and from homeschools to large schools across the country using their materials, actually across the world. They're a great example, and there are many others. And you said, people don't like you talking about politics. Well, the word it comes from polis, the Greek word for city. And our city, unless we want to hide inside and never depend on another human being, our city is our home. So of course you have to be involved in politics. And there are many speeches in this book that talk where our leaders are telling us, if you're not involved, if you don't strive to make it better, you're culpable for the problems and responsible for the demise.
Yeah.
So, yes, of course, please do talk about politics, but it starts at home, and then we go further out of the home into the city and leadership, in industry, in faith, in civics.
You mentioned faith. How, excuse me. How important in a couple minutes, Allison, before we go to the break? How important is uh, Jesus says, "Fear not." How many times in Scripture it says, "Fear not"? Okay, fear is what's wrecking us. We're afraid to go out, and particularly as Catholics. Not all of us, of course, because we're doing this, and you're doing what you're doing at Mount Tetano Media. How important it is to have courage when you go out into the public square. Say, no, 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 no. I don't, thank you, President Obama. I don't have the freedom to worship. I know I could pray the rosary at home. Thanks for telling me something I already know. No, I have the right to the free exercise of my religion, okay, my worldview, that I could bring out into the public square. And I'm not only going to defend it, I'm going to attack your empty worldview. I'm going on the offense, not on the defense. How important it is to remember we're not defending, okay? We have to go on offense because, as you were describing, because our kids' education's at stake. Their future flourishing is at stake. That requires a fight. They've made it a fight. Well, guess what? You got to lace up the boxing gloves and you got to get out there. You have the floor for about a minute or two, Allison.
Well, we're not talking about that book today, but it's just so perfect to this question. Which do you know this? Do you know the book Quo Vadis?
I know of it, yeah.
Okay. So Quo Vadis was written by Henryk Sienkiewicz, a Polish Nobel Prize winner when the Nobel Prize meant something wonderful. And Quo Vadis is the story of the time of Nero in ancient Rome and the early church. And it's a story of it's a conversion story, it's a redemption story, but it's a talk about courage. That is a wonderful book to understand the early church, the courage required by those people, nothing compared to the courage required by us on the whole, and to leave no excuses and no concern or weakness. That story is incredibly inspiring. The early Christians, I mean, their stories of it. They went singing to execution by being consumed by lions, by crucifixion. So we're not facing that. Not right now, not in the States in general.
Right, but we do know, and we have examples in recent history where that was exactly the case. It's not in America, thank God, all right, but in other places, right? We talk on the show all the time at the front line with Joe and Joe. Look at what the Eastern Bloc went through. Look at what Poland went through. Look at what the people of the Soviet Union went through. So we do have recent examples. We don't have to, and it's an appropriate example, of course, to talk about the early Christians. But we see what those who are of right mind, let's put it like that, have gone through under these totalitarian regimes. And we're grateful for what you do because you point out, well, that's right. Education, 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 great books, great ideas, transcendentals. These are the things that we need to be striving for. Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're going to take a quick break. So visit her website, Mount Titano Media, Titano, MountTitanomedia.com. And in the first segment, we're talking about finding our words. And Joe and I don't like to be spoilers. So we want our audience to go out and buy the book. Okay. So go buy the book and go read about what Allison is talking about. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about the heroines of history. And those books are also available on Amazon. So if you got to buy it from Amazon, go ahead. We'll allow you to this one time. Okay. But go buy it on Amazon. You're at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. We'll be right back with Allison Ellis. Don't go anywhere.
Joe,
Welcome back. Go ahead, Allison.
when we come back, can I read something from
We'll
from
jump right
Finding
in.
Earth? Yeah.
We'll jump right in. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe, Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello, and we are way in the breach with Allison Ellis, and we are discussing in the first segment, finding our words, words that made America. And in this segment, we're going to be discussing heroines of history. And you could find Allison and her work at Mount mounttotenomedia.com. But I'm going to throw it over to Allison. She wants to read something.
Yes, they're all my favorite speeches, but this one speaks very strongly to words. I've studied the history of word usage, inspired by this speech by General Douglas MacArthur, delivered at West Point in 1962, known as the Duty, Honor, Country speech. When I read those three words the first time, I thought, duty and honor. Those words I don't hear them that much. You don't hear people saying that's your duty or it's my honor to do this. So I researched the usage of those words, and it turns out that in fact, from 1850 to today, they're hardly used. So that means either the meaning of the word has changed or the concept is not in the public sphere. Well, let's see what MacArthur had to say about it in 1962. Duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. The unbelievers will say that they are but words, but a slogan, but a flamboyant phrase. Every pedant, every demagogue, every cynic, every hypocrite, every troublemaker, and I am sorry to say, some others of an entirely different character will try to downgrade them even to the extent of mockery and ridicule. But these are some of the things they do. They build your basic character. They mold you for the future roles as custodians of the nation's defense. They make you strong enough to know when you are weak and brave enough to face yourself when you are afraid. They teach you to be proud and unbending in honest failure, but humble and gentle in success. Not to substitute words for actions, not to seek the path of comfort, but to face the stress and spur of difficulty and challenge, to learn to stand up in the storm, but to have compassion on those who fail, to master yourself before you seek to master others. And he goes on and on. I think this is one of the most beautiful expressions of the meaning, the purpose, importance of words.
Absolutely. Allison Ellis joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So please go out, buy her books, Finding Our Words, Words That Made America. We discussed that in the first segment. Please share this video if you're watching it online, X, Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube. And we're going to be talking about the heroines of history. And I'll hand it over to Joe Resinello. By the way, Allison, that was, see, this is why, you know, we're smart enough to know the difference between a speech like that that's meant to inspire and raise people up, and
Yes.
the insipid nonsense that we see out there nowadays. But that's why you're doing what you're doing. That's why Joe and I are doing what we're doing. And the Veritas Catholic Radio Network and many, many people out there are saying, again, one more time, we're not on the defense. Time of defense is over. Okay, we're on the offense. Joe Resinello.
Allison, in your second book that we're going to talk about today, Heroines of History, we're going to talk about some brave and faithful women. The role of women clearly has changed. I mean, considerably. What is viewed as, you know, the goal of a woman. Just speaking from my own, you know, home, my wife is, she has an MBA. She has 5 kids. So, I mean, clearly she has to take a step back. You know, we both do to a degree, to allot the proper amount of time to our children. I have an MBA too. You're limited. If you want to see your kids, you know, like let's be real. When they pay you ridiculous amounts of money in this world, they don't do that to leave at 5 o'clock. That's just not the way the world works. So to have a proper home, particularly a mother that is open to life, which is our teaching in the Catholic Church, you're going to take a step back. It's just the way it is. Obviously, you still have to, you know, provide, and there's realities, and not everyone's in the same situation. I'm not passing judgment on anyone because, to be honest with you, life is hard for everyone, particularly when you have children. But the role of women has changed, and what is viewed as good, in many ways, if you ask me, has taken from women. It's taken something that's fundamental from them, particularly the fact that they bear children and give life. Nothing is more important than that. The greatest creature ever born of a man and woman was the Blessed Mother. We forget that. As people, they criticize the Catholic Church over the way we supposedly view women when we elevate the greatest person who was ever born, because Jesus was begotten, not made. It was a woman. Talk about that and talk about some of these brave and faithful women that you discuss in your book.
Another subject that we could talk about for months on end and never stop enjoying the conversation. It's an unbelievable topic. What has happened to the family and to women? So women having the freedom to choose to work or stay home. Yes, as a woman, I agree entirely with that. Absolutely. We had to fight for that freedom, and we were the last ones to get the right to vote in the United States. So there was a very strong and beautiful purpose in those women who stood up to defend women's rights. But that's been taken, obviously so far that, well, let me give you an example. Joe P., you were saying that when your children walk into their school, there's the painting of the School of Athens. Beautiful. We were at one point going to be transferring to Korea with a job opportunity. And so I was thinking that it might be a neat opportunity for me to find a really outstanding school there, volunteer teach in that school, English, and thereby my daughter would get to learn Korean as well. So I went to visit this beautiful, elite international school on the island of Jeju, which is, let's call it the Hawaii of Korea. And when you walked into that school, there was a huge mural behind the front desk that started with, I guess, astronaut with A, and it was zoologist with Z at the bottom. And all the careers, that a woman could aspire to. It was a girls' school. All the careers, and I sat there reading through every single one of them, and I got to M, and there was no mother. And I got to W, and there was no wife. And I thought, all right, I see the strengths and I see the weaknesses with what's happening in this school, because mother and wife are career choices. And one of the things I talk about is just go in a graveyard. What's written on the tombstones? Not VP of so-and-so tech company, not president of whatever. Beloved mother of, cherished daughter, revered father. At the end of the day, sooner or later, the truth is obvious, usually while still living. People realize sooner than later, if they've made the choice to sacrifice family or to sacrifice, they had one, but still outsourced their family life, the reward for that comes home, and it's not a good one.
Allison Ellis is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Perfect example of that. Again, we don't have to reach deep in the history. Harrison Butker, right, Super Bowl champion kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, goes to a Catholic school and tells the young girls there who have just graduated, okay, your most cherished role will be wife and mother. And the everybody just goes crazy over something just as basic and natural as that. He didn't say don't have a career. He didn't say anything. All he said was, you'll find, paraphrasing of course, you'll find your most cherished vocation will be of wife and mother. And they wanted him fired. Super Bowl winning kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs with a couple of Super Bowl rings, and they wanted him fired. This is the world that's why I said to you, Allison, we're happy that you decided to come on the show to talk about this. This is why we have to go on offense. And thank God, many people said, no, we're not allowed. You're not going to attack this man who is a Roman Catholic, goes to a Catholic school and says something that's really authentically Catholic. But that's one of the problems, especially I wouldn't know, I have a son. If I had that's hard enough. Okay. I wouldn't know if I was in Joe Ressinello's shoes, he's got two daughters, right? I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be scared to death. And I'm not generally a scared guy, but I would be scared if I had a daughter. I wouldn't know what to do, because that's what happens when you're trying to raise a young girl to become a wife and mother, and find her authentic self. Not that fake stuff that goes on out there. Yeah, I think you know where I'm going. What are your comments?
Well, so I like to ask this. just off of the top of your head, what do you think are the one or two names that every teenager on earth would know, a woman's name? Which two women would they know the name?
Kamala Harris.
Michelle Obama.
That's if it's politics, but if they're on their iPhone and they're listening to music and this and that, it's going to be their heroines that they're
Taylor
right.
Swift.
Swift and Beyonce, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay, so are those the women that we want our young daughters to emulate, and we want our young, strong sons to marry?
Not
And if the answer,
not my house.
if the answer is no, if the answer is no, whom do we want them to emulate? And growing up in Catholic school, yes.
No, I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but look at Charlie Kirk, all right? Tragically, obviously a month ago got killed. But just before then, he said, if you want the antidote to toxic femininity, why are we not looking to the Blessed Mother? Which got him in a whole lot of trouble with a lot of evangelicals and Protestants. But he said, you want the antidote to this? We're not looking to Our Lady enough. But I'm going to throw it right back to you, Allison.
Yes. That's exactly right. And I was going to say that growing up in Catholic school, when our Catholic school that I attended was still intact at the time and still had nuns and priests teaching. And those nuns, what I remember most from my childhood was them talking about now Saint Mother Teresa. So Saint Mother Teresa was my heroine. And so much so that when I was older, I called her and asked to go work with her. But that wouldn't have been my heroine if I hadn't been hearing about her all the time in grade school, if I didn't know what she was doing and hadn't learned the beauty in a life. And this is the common denominator. What distinguishes all the women in this book versus the other women we talked about who are, household names? Every woman here in all their different ways, whether leading empire or leading the home, their life was based in the founding Christian principle, my life for yours. And those others, can we say that they are leading their life to serve others? Of course not.
Right. Well, there you go, using naughty ideas and naughty words like, sacrifice to will the good of the other.
Honor, exactly.
Right, and this is what the church teaches. Well, every parent naturally knows that when you have a child, and spouses too. All right, when you decide to get married, you are not living completely for yourself anymore. And when you decide to have children, you're not living for yourself anymore. You're not. You have to put their needs first. The inversion in this perverted culture that we live in is even look at Hollywood. Look what they do to their own kids. Like the top 10 list of A-listers in Hollywood all have kids who are transing. Excuse me? Because they're leading selfish lives, all right, which is the opposite of what you're talking about in your book, Heroines of History, women who have been selfless, like Mother Teresa. Let me not be long-winded. Joe Rossinello.
Who are some of the other, I'm assuming Mother Teresa's in the book, who are some of the other women?
So we have an example, Zenobia of Palmyra. That's not a household name. Most people have never heard of Zenobia. I think most people haven't heard of Palmyra. But she lived, around 250 AD. She was leading an empire at a very young age, but she was eventually conquered by Roman generals, and she was taken back to Rome, in chains, and she married one of these generals and then had children with him. I like to use her as an example because her father was assassinated. She ended up in power. When she was in that role in her youth, she did it to the best of her ability and was a very good leader. When she was conquered, and of course that's not the ideal, she was forced into a marriage with her conqueror, but nevertheless, she accepted that fate that was unavoidable at that point and still made the absolute best of it. And records show that she ended up happily married and raised very healthy, successful children. So she devoted all of that previous effort and energy into her family. The ability to be resilient and not not lie back and wait for someone to fix it for you, which will never happen. She an extraordinary figure. We have Marcella of Rome, Saint Marcella, who had it with the corruption and the decay in Rome. And though from a very wealthy aristocratic family, basically started monasticism in Rome. And she attracted all kinds of wealthy women who too were turning away from the vice and corruption and devoting themselves to prayer and service. And then in an era where we have everybody claiming to be the first, and that's why they're special. Let's go to the field of academia. Betizia Gozzadini, I'll read a little bit about her if I can, just a moment. She lived from 1209 AD to 1261. This story was written about her in 1901. She says, "We do not know how it happened that Betizia Gozzadini stepped out of the traditional seclusion of her sex as early as the 13th century to be made Doctor of Civil and Canon Law in the University of Bologna at the age of 27. She had already pronounced a funeral oration in Latin and otherwise distinguished herself several years before." Okay, so women have been leaders in education, not necessarily commonly, but extraordinary leaders in education and brilliant at a very young age, classically educated. So we don't get to claim first, and that's the reason why we're great, because we weren't even the first. Women have been in positions of leadership in all fields at all times, just not to the degree that is possible now.
Right. Allison Ellis joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So please go out and buy her books. So the first one is Finding Our Words, Words That Made America. And the second, there it is on the screen. And Heroines of History. Now, you could visit Allison's website, Mount Titano Media, Mount, the word Mount, Titano, Titano media.com. And you can find out more about what Allison is doing, and it's all extremely valuable. That's why she's with us here at the front line with Joe and Joe to discuss, education. It's we have to again go on the offensive and take back the education system in this country. However, we have to do it. Joe Rossinello.
Allison, as you were talking about some of these great women, I was thinking of Saint Gianna Molla, who, for those who don't know who she is, she was a doctor in Italy. She married an engineer. She came from a very big family. And she got married a little later in life, and she had 4 children. Her 4th child was a problemed pregnancy. I don't recall the medical issue that she suffered, but it was definitely something that was problematic, and they recommended that she get an abortion. Now, these are highly educated power couples, as you would call them. You have the engineer, you have the doctor. They have 3 kids and most probably will live a wonderful life. There's tons of people like that in America, and I'm sure throughout the world. But she chose to have the child, and she died as a result. Her husband raised 4 children alone. I have 5 kids. If my wife died, I'll be honest with you, and they're all under 11, I don't know what I would do. I'm going to be completely honest with you. So I've thought about what this man had to do, and that is a Herculean task. So here she is. She sacrifices her whole life. She was a highly educated woman. Talk about that and the lack thereof as far as character. Who is doing something like that? I'll be honest with you. I have met in my life people who have raised large families, and I've also worked in the corporate field. If you tell me that you raised 8 kids, particularly a mom of 8 kids, and you started X or Y, or you're some CEO, I'll be honest with you, that pales in comparison to raising 8 hooligans from New Jersey, running the streets like a maniac. I will tell you that right now, because it's your skin in the game. That is so hard. And there's nothing more noble than doing that. And I bring her up because she had it all, as so many people wish to have. She was a doctor. Her husband's an engineer. They already had 3 kids. How easy it could have just been get rid of this child. By the way, that child became a doctor herself. So talk about that, because I'll be honest with you, if you ask me, in a modern day, she's a 20th century saint. She is somebody that all women should look to. She achieved everything. She was noble, she was decent, she was virtuous, she was brilliant, she was a mother, she was a wife. Talk about that. Do we see that? I don't see it.
Not in general, but more and more, because I'm
Good. I like your
very
attitude.
deep in the homeschool world. And I came from, I mean, I was trading the futures markets for my career and then publishing about the futures markets. So it was very financially rewarding and enabled me to travel the world. I mean, I'm just one small example, but there are many women who have realized that the career has its place, but it's not the meaning of life. And talking about the role of mothers, if I can read just one more excerpt.
Please,
this is
please.
about,
Please do.
okay, so George Washington, founder of America, General George Washington, president. Few people would think somebody had contributed more to our country perhaps than George Washington. Well, I went to the source of the source, to his mother, Mary Washington, unbelievable figure. So this is the introduction written in 1850 by a woman named Elizabeth Ellis. She says, "The mother of Washington, there needs no eulogy to awaken the associations which cling around that sacred name. Our hearts do willing homage to the venerated parent of the chief." Okay, nobody's heart today does venerated homage. We don't even know her name. That's what we're going to change with this book. And then she continues, "The contemplation of Washington's character naturally directs attention to her whose maternal care guided and guarded his early years. What she did, and the blessing of a world that follows her, teach impressively while showing the power and the duty of those who would mold the character of the age to come." There it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's in our power. It is our duty. We are to mold the character of the age to come. And look at Mary Washington. Look at what her devotion created.
Well, let me comment on that, because duty comes from a belief in God. I think that because we are living in a post-Christian society, we've forgotten what duty is all about. There's a saying, you can't lead until you know how to serve. And I think that's what's lacking in the American family, because there was a time where duty, first of all, you saw the duty of a husband and wife to each other. It was modeled. Like, we're in it together, one flesh. We have a duty to God, family, country. It was just baked into America. It's no longer that. And I bring up duty for one reason. The duty is now to self. It's about me. What can I get out of this country? For me and me alone, everyone else be damned. And that is not how you build a nation, or a family for that matter. And that's what we see. That's what I see, even from my father's generation to mine. And by the time my father was a child of the 50s, America was already, which you pointed out in the other segment, corrupted. But it was still there. People didn't just leave their wife. Even if they weren't religious, you had kids. You didn't leave your wife. What are you, crazy? And if you did, you were an outcast. You were, like, by society. People looked at you. You had a duty to her. You had a duty to your children. That word is so foreign in the American lexicon. You brought it up twice, and that's why I bring it up now. People don't even know what that means. Duty. Duty to who? To me. It's about me. It's a me generation. Am I just going crazy?
No, and every leader in this book spoke to that. And the sense of duty, and this gets back to the very beginning, One more reading, this is from Washington. "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, the firmest props of the duties of men and citizens. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion.
Yep. Well, Allison, that's a perfect place to end it. I mean, that's speaking our language. I mean, that's what Joe and I say. We're not the first ones to say it. We won't, God willing, we're not going to be the last ones to say it. All the things we're talking about, you really want, like, people are out there and they're thinking that, well, if I just vote this way or vote that way, and again, politics is important, but we have to remember until we're back to that foundation and many of the ideas that you've discussed with us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, until we get back to that foundation, we're not going to find our way. As I said earlier, like C.S. Lewis said, you got to stop, turn around, go back to where you started. Allison, you have about 30 seconds. Final thoughts for our audience.
We change this one by one, and there's no way around it. Every single person is responsible for the outcome for our nation. So tonight, when you're home with your family, turn off the divisive devices, pull out Finding Our Words, pull out Heroines, pull out the Bible or the Catechism, and read together aloud as a family, and include the very youngest children. If they can hear you, they're learning.
It's funny
Absolutely.
you say that, and I'll just say this real quick. I've been reading. I went through St. Joseph's Catechism. I'm on Pius X's Catechism now. Before we pray the Rosary, I read 2 pages of the Catechism every night, and it's a good thing.
Allison, where can our audience members find out more about you and your work and what you have going on?
MountTitanomedia.com, and the books are available there and on Amazon.
And the books we're discussing are Finding Our Words, Words That Made America, and Heroines of History. You could find them, I'm sure, at the website. Also, you could go on Amazon. You could just put in Allison Ellis's name, or the titles of the book. They'll pop up, buy them, read them. And yeah, let's stay on the offensive. Allison Ellis, you are welcome back at the front line with Joe and Joe anytime, our sister. This was a fabulous and important conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joe and Joe. So until the next time.
Absolutely. And thank you out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, the Veritas app, share it with your friends and family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And Joe and I go live Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time, across social media, X, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube. We take all of these interviews we do at Veritas and we pop them on there also. So if you like our content, you like what we're doing, you want to help us get out to a wider audience, please hit a like, subscribe, a share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.